Between the years 1868 and 1880, around 16,000 Czechs left their homeland and set out on a journey to settle down in a distant Volhynia region of the Russian Empire. This is their story. The Industrial Revolution in Czech lands, which is a collective phrase for the historic lands of the Bohemian Crown, meaning the Bohemia, Moravia and Czech Silesia, that were in the late 19th century part of Austria-Hungary, caused a rapid population increase. There were 4,660,000 people living in the area in year 1800, but by 1880 the population almost doubled to 8,250,000. The Czech land started to be overpopulated, and because of it, the availability of the farmland decreased while the price of it increased. And when there wasn't enough farmland available in Czechia, people started to look for it abroad. One of the options for them was Volhynia. Volhynia region was located in the western part of the Russian Empire, bordering Austria-Hungary. Although it was similar in size to the Czech lands, it was very different in living conditions. The region had less than half of the population of Czech lands at around 2 million people at the time of the migration wave. Many institutions, such as schools and hospitals, were almost non-existent in the rural regions. The average GDP per capita was around 600 to 700 international dollars. This was only half compared to the $1,200 in the Czech lands at the time. Road and railroad infrastructure was also much less developed. The Russian Empire encouraged this migration, promoting the popular idea at the time that it was better for the Czechs to move to a Slavic country rather than risk losing their nationality in German or Anglo-Saxon countries like the USA. By this, they also wanted to weaken the influence of the Polish aristocracy, which was dominant in the region. However, the encouragement alone was likely not enough to persuade the people to leave their homeland. A significant shift occurred with the Russian Emancipation Reform of 1861, which abolished serfdom. Additionally, the crushing of the Polish uprising in 1863, during which up to 80,000 Poles were killed or deported, played a crucial role. This created a large amount of available land for Czechs to settle, primarily from large Polish landowners who were eager to sell their property in a country that had become increasingly hostile to them. Czech newspapers called Pokrok wrote about Volhynia during this time. If we won't buy the Volhynian soil, the Germans will. For 1,000 guldens, you can buy 5 korets of land in our country and you will still struggle. Here, for 500 guldens, you can buy 60 korets of black, better soil than in Chrudim or Žatec. Other 500 guldens you can keep for the travel, building, and 1 year of food. This was likely an exaggeration, and the price of the agricultural land was probably around 10 times cheaper than in Czech lands. However, this was still a big difference because at that time the average daily salary for a machinery worker was 2/3 of Austrian gulden, while metallurgy worker could earn half a gulden per day. Purchasing land in Russia often came with difficulties. Czechs were often sending few delegates in advance with a list of people, amount of land they wanted and how much they were willing to pay for it. But because these delegates didn't speak Russian and they didn't know Russian law, they needed a middleman. These middlemen often weren't honest and kept part of the land for themselves without telling the delegates, or bought a land which came with a debt. This led to many legal disputes and made settling much harder for some of the Czechs. Most of the migrants were young families because they could better endure the travel and struggles of settling down in a new country. The first 17 families moved to Volhynia region already in 1863, but organized inflow of them started in year 1868 when 135 families moved there. The year after that, in 1869, 449 families followed, which was the biggest annual growth of the new community. Some of them went on a several weeks long journey on carriages with their cattle. Others went by train to the town Brody on Austro-Russian border, from where they needed to continue by a horse carriage because the railway didn't go further. Most of the carriages were provided by the local Jewish population, but because most Czechs didn't have enough money for them, they had to go into debt. When they finally arrived in Volhynia, they encountered another problem. The lands they bought were heavily forested and the trees needed to be cut down. Because of this, they didn't have enough time before winter came. They were only able to build shelters for the cattle and themselves had to live in improvised zemlyankas, which are very basic dugout houses. Russian authorities were initially uncertain about the Czech immigrants. Most of them were Catholic, but decrees from 1864 and 1865 forbade Catholics from buying land. These decrees were mainly targeted to lower the influence of Polish landowners that possessed 370,000 hectares of land in Volhynia region compared to 26,000 of Russian landowners. They have finally settled on the explanation that Czech immigrants are descendants of Hussites and that only religious persecution in Austria forced them to become Catholics, and they granted them religious freedom. To quote the Tsarist authorities, the immigrants came to Russia to find freedom for their faith, which is close to Orthodoxy, in the midst of the fraternal Russian people, and that here, in Volhynia, all Czechs will soon be brought into the bosom of the Orthodox Church. Due to a significant labor shortage in Volhynia and their agricultural expertise, the immigrants were considered an asset to raising the overall level of agriculture in the region. Russian authorities further attracted them by giving them right to establish manufacturing enterprises, a 5-year tax holiday, and a right to national education and self-government. On the other hand, the Austrian leadership did not look kindly on the emigration. The governorship in Prague was reluctant to issue passports to men whom they believed were trying to avoid military service. To their credit, this was partly true, at least for those who emigrated before year 1874, as they were exempt from military service in the Austrian army. Additionally, the Russian Empire, as part of the benefits it offered to immigrants, did not impose military service on them. The conservative, pro-Austrian newspapers also had negative views on the immigration. They were writing about struggles in Volhynia, land rich only with sand and swamps, exploitation from the Russian authorities, and stories about people returning back to Austria-Hungary. Most of these news were however exaggerated and did not stop the people who wanted to leave. The Czechs were mainly settling down in existing Ukrainian villages and towns or on former Polish estates. In the first case, they accepted the names of the local Ukrainian villages, but often created a new settlement next to them and added Český, meaning Czech, to the original name of the village. Most of the immigrants settled in western part of the Volhynia region, close to the Austrian border. In the whole Volhynian region, Czechs inhabited 652 villages. 112 of them were newly founded villages by the Czech Volhynians, 40 were existing Ukrainian villages with the Czech settlements next to them, 158 were villages with partial Czech population, and in 382 of them only few individual Czech families lived. In the early years, the settlers lived in very modest conditions. They wore wooden shoes or sometimes nothing at all. Many of them were weavers, so they wore clothes they made themselves. There was also a shortage of food, especially during the first year due to a poor and short harvest. The most common food was simple pea porridge. The climate was also harsher than in Czech lands. From a letter of one of the settlers. Kharkiv and its surrounding is somehow on the borderline of south and north, and because of that, the heat and cold clash here. On the flatlands, great winds are emerging, much bigger than anyone in Czech lands experience, and they last even for 14 days. The heat in the summer is unbearable, but sometimes, even during summer, freezing temperatures occur. There were also outbreaks of infectious diseases due to the different climate, poor hygiene, and lack of clean drinking water. Combined with unbalanced diet, this led to outbreaks of intermittent fever, also known as Volhynian fever. As a result, some people decided to return to their homeland. After they arrived, the new community prioritized building schools where, among other things, Czech language would be taught. Because there were not many schools in the region at the time, especially in the rural regions, local Ukrainian children started to attend the Czech schools too. Some of the Ukrainians also adopted Czech traditions, such as painting eggs for Easter. The Czechs were also building houses of culture and created associations, such as Voluntary Firefighters and Sokol Movement, which was a popular all-age gymnastics organization back in the Czech lands. Despite all of the initial setbacks, long journey, hunger, disease, harsh weather and poor living conditions, the Volhynian Czechs proved that they could survive in their new homeland, and in the years that followed, they would also prove that they could thrive. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, like and subscribe would be greatly appreciated. Have a nice day and goodbye.